Thanks so much, Audrey. We're also expecting leaders from the UJ SRC to join us a little bit later, and hopefully we'll get them on the phone. They're not here as yet. But in studio, we have Carl Niehaus, a former spokesperson of Nelson Mandela. He's also the NEC member of the MKMVA. Botsang Moilwa is a political analyst. Gentlemen, good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. A glimpse of what the students, the young lions, are woke to, in the sense that it's not just a one-sided narrative that speaks of a limited scope of state of capture. Your view, Mr. Niehaus, that the future is in good hands?
Well, Cindy, I'm very impressed with the students. It shows the depth of understanding that they have. And I'm also, in the same breath, very unimpressed with Mr. Gordhan and Mr. Jonas, because they went there telling a narrative that does not relate to the reality of what South Africans experience. South Africans experience that white monopoly capital is in control of this economy. It experiences that they are being exploited. They know that colonialism, and colonialism of a special type, morphed into white monopoly capitalism, and the students said it very clearly. And they asked Mr. Gordhan, are you here in order to try and present a narrative because you yourself sit on the board of many of these companies? Are you captive by white monopoly capital? And I'm afraid the message that former Minister Gordhan gave is that he is captive. And in fact, South Africans are tired of being told stories that do not relate to the reality of our South African lives.
Yeah, would we say that this is probably the next, not gatekeepers, but custodians, if you will, of the future of South Africa, being the young lions, as Nelson Mandela always said, that we need to pass on the baton for a young blood to take us forward?
Well, good evening, Cindy, and fellow panelists and the viewers. It is not only Nelson Mandela who had spoken about the young lions, but also if you look at the history of the revolution all over the world, it has always been led by students or by youth, if it's not the working class like in some other countries. And it is actually a sad state and tale of affairs that you find former cabinet ministers, the supposed to be liberation movement, activists, come and try and confuse the youth and the students of today who have more access to information than many of us had during our time. And you try to confuse these students and youth. You try to lie to them. A whole former Minister of Finance who is well respected in this country, who actually, when he was removed from the position for not complying with the party requirements and with the policies that the president of the country is pushing, goes and tries to lie to students, academic students, not pupils at primary school, and try and tell them that there's no white monopoly capital. But also it is becoming rhetoric and irritating that people like Pravin Gordhan, in every statement they mention and they talk about the Guptas as if the Guptas have captured or they are owning this country, they are owning the capital of this country, they are owning the resources of this country. Pravin Gordhan himself, having been a Minister of Finance in this country, knows very well that the capital, the land, and one of the students mentioned the land question to say, who owns the capital in the country? Who owns that? Is it not white people now? You can't go to such people who have access to information and academic situation and try and confuse them and say to them, but white people don't own the land, it's the Guptas and there's no white monopoly capital. They were taking chances, and I must applaud those black students who stood up and left their political affiliations aside and stood up as students to say, but Pravin and your team, you are undermining our intellect. And I think that's the way forward. That's where the country is heading to.
Yeah, and I want to edify our young leaders properly, but I think there's been a change of name. So if you will just indulge us and tell us what your role is at UJ, your name, and why you rejected the lecture at the event. Good evening to you.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I'm fine. My name is Nondobego Vilagati, and I'm studying public relations at the University of Johannesburg.
Okay, so why did you reject the lecture? Why didn't you find it objective or of value?
We did not understand why he had to come to the campus. Why weren't the other political leaders at the campus? It was not right, it was not fair. We feel like we were manipulated to actually be on their side and everything, which was which we did not understand. It feels like when we need them, they're not there. But now when they need us, they have to come to us and manipulate our minds and tell us what to do or what to say and stuff like that. It was just not right.
Would you say that there's a clear disconnect in terms of how the older generation or maybe even politicians connect with the real issues that young people, primarily black young students, are going through in current society?
It's very disconcerting to see how out of touch Pravin Gordhan is. And then you remember that he was Minister of Finance, and obviously he was part of the committee that dealt with the issue also of student fees. He is totally out of touch with what the reality of South Africa is. And he was so condescending towards these students. He's telling them unsubstantiated stories. In some instances, let us just call it straightforward lies. When the students get upset, when the students say to Mr. Gordhan, but what you are doing is that you are acting simply as an agent of white monopoly capital. He then questions their morality and their ethics. Now, you see, this is the problem that we had with Mr. Gordhan throughout the period that he was now Minister of Finance. He tries to put himself up there as the paragon of morality, while at the same time he follows new liberal policies. He tries to cover up for white monopoly capital. He tries to present himself as a man of reason, but he's actually an agent of the white monopoly capitalists in this country who over centuries, if we think how they morphed from colonialism to colonialism of a special type, have been exploiting the people of this country. It is a disgrace that someone who is a member of the national executive of the African National Congress can behave and conduct himself in this manner. And I'm glad that Minister Mbalula took him on and pointed out to him that the students actually showed that they are, in terms of their understanding and their intellect about the South African situation, far more on top of issues than what he is.
All right, we also have a young leader here, Saki Zita, who is a student at the University of Johannesburg, my alma mater actually. But good to have you, and thanks so much for joining us. When the world from your perspective, with all the politics and the noise going about, why is it that this message delivered by former Finance Minister and his deputy or team didn't resonate with you?
Because good day, ma'am. How
Hello,
are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thanks.
And
I'm
it's
good to
Cindy,
meet
ma'am is okay.
To me, it feels like these people are using us whenever they need us. If we need them, they don't come. So to me, it feels like they are trying to manipulate us to take their side before they can. I can say these people are manipulating us, because whenever we need them, they're not there for us. So they're doing it's like a win-win. It must be a win-win situation, not a win-lose situation. Whenever we need them, they must be there, and whenever they need us, they must be there too. That's why we take it as a manipulation. We don't need to be used or something.
Yeah, but So sorry. I just wanted to find out what how you view the current political discourse in South Africa. Nantobe.
No, it feels like a manipulation, honestly. As I said before, it really is, because you cannot be coming to us as if we do not know what's going on. We do know what's going on. We do know what's happening around us, and we are informed about it. You can't come. There are a lot of issues that could be dealt with than just only this. So I really feel like we are being forced to do things or think in a certain way. We are students, we learn every day, we are informed, we know what's happening around us.
Yeah, so is it also about the narrow focus on what has been termed state of capture, and portraying that as the end-all and be-all, or the personification of the problems in this country? Are you saying that, in your view, there is more to it, and you can substantiate that?
Yes. I can say there's more to it, because some of people think that ANC is divided, right? So these people, as this Pravin Gordhan came to us yesterday, to UJ yesterday, it feels like he is trying to manipulate us to take his side, as ANC is trying to be divided. That's why we are saying no. We don't want to be part of that. We'll decide whenever we want to be, which part we want to take, whenever we want to take it.
Yeah.
Not in time.
So we can't avoid the politics also permeating into higher education because your lives are affected by what is going on Tobago. Maybe if you'll just explain to us, because there were representatives of various political parties in the hall. So it wasn't just ANC members who rejected the message from the panel.
Yeah, as you said that there were other political parties, but we feel like they should have also said something about this whole thing. It shouldn't have just been being told this, like about what was happening yesterday. It shouldn't have been Pravin Gordhan only speaking. They should have also spoken, said something about it.
Yeah. I mean, let's just take some of the comments made, taking a show of hands, for example, who's been offered 600 million as a bribe, and, then casting aspersions that somehow you immoral yourselves by not necessarily condemning those allegations.
Cindy, Bob Marley said it to the world. You can fool many people most of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. What Pravin Gordhan is trying to do is trying to fool these students. The youth are in majority in this country, just like women. And youth forms a bigger part of the students. Now, his strategy was to go there and fool the youth so that they may think there is no white monopoly capital. To stand up in front of youth and say to them, raise your hand, those who would have taken 600 million that the Guptas had offered to Deputy Minister Mcebisi, who was standing there actually like a puppet. It is actually undermining the intelligence of those students. It is actually questioning their moral standard as human beings to say, if 600 million, actually, if I was one of those students, I would have said to Pravin, I would have taken it to pay for my studies, since you, as the Minister of Finance, has dismally failed with the Minister of Higher Education to can make sure that they take needs of these students. No political leader in this country should stand up and go and talk to students or address them and not address their fundamental requirement, the cost of higher education in this country. And that's what political leaders should engage students on, not to use them as pawns or tools to fight their battle, because that's where students will revolt. And we have seen it in this country in 85. We have seen it in this country in 76. We know that the riots of 1960 were led by the former Youth League, that became the PAC after. So any politician who's going to undermine the intelligence and the power and the knowledge of students is doomed. And Pravin Gordhan, in this instance, he's a doomed former Minister of Finance. And I think he should shut up, sit down, or take pension and stop confusing the country. We have serious issues as a nation of our youth than to try and drag them into their dirty linen of the infighting into the ruling party. And he has become a spokesperson for white capital and using our own kids.
Sure, let's talk about the fundamental questions that yourself, Saki, and Nontobeko and your peers wanted to be addressed, and put it out to the nation that even in our private spaces, at dinner tables, etc., we realistically look at where the country is and what we need to do moving forward. I'll start. In fact, maybe let's start with Professor Perihanyane. I'm so taken with the students. I beg your pardon, Professor Perihanyane. He is a professor with the Northwest University and a political analyst. Just your view, again, Professor, in the fundamental questions not being answered. We're clearly deviating from things that matter primarily to young people.
Good evening, Cindy. Good evening to your esteemed panelists there, and of course to your viewers. Look, if you're soliciting my view to the whole thing, is that quite a few things that should be taken note here. It would have been nicer that yesterday's debate was somewhat less toned down in relation to the emotions. It would have been nicer to listen to more substance, albeit in a terrain where there's fundamental ideological differences. And the contributions made yesterday speak to those differences in ideology. What worries me, again, is that there seems to be a growing trend of populist approach to politics in this country. If the debate yesterday was allowed to bring more facts, regardless of the differences, I think we could have done ourselves a bit of justice in terms of cause and sift of facts, and of course make sure that issues that you're raising in your studio there were dealt with amicably yesterday.
No, and point well taken. I think that's what the students were saying, that we needed to hear a different narrative and not just one that is prescribed in how you're supposed to perceive what is going on. Just coming back to you, what do you feel the fundamental questions were missed that were supposed to have been answered yesterday?
I think in the near future they should just, before doing this event, it's like they surprised us. They should at least plan it in time and tell us that we are coming and we will address these things and this thing, so that we can be expecting them, rather than to just come and surprise us with those questions and stuff.
So firstly, they imposed themselves, and secondly, the issues that you face, you felt that were essentially ignored.
We have, fees issues that are very important. We thought that would be dealt with. Most students did not go in there for what was actually happening. They thought their issues would be addressed, but they weren't. So it was imposed on us, and we were confused at what's going on. It feels like we are being dragged into a fight that doesn't even involve us in a way. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, but if you look at what is also some of the questions that came out of the auditorium regarding Pravin, or former finance minister's interests and business interests, why would you as students feel that he's conflicted and not necessarily in your corner, as it were, to fight your issues?
One thing that will make me say he's conflicted, because he answered the question that he wanted to answer. He didn't answer all the questions. That's one of the reasons I can say he was conflicted, and he was pushing his own personal agenda on the other side. I can't see he was coming to address the student. He was coming to push his own personal agenda.
All right, and now just the accountability again, and I like where the students are coming from, and I think all political leadership needs to go through the same scrutiny. Number one, to know your audience and to accord them or afford them the necessary respect that they are woke, they're intelligent, they're well averse with the issues of this country. Do you think that we still have an approach where we speak down at the youth, or we speak on the behalf of the youth and at our own behest?
Well, we shouldn't be speaking on behalf of the youth. We must listen to the youth. You know, Cindy, I wrote an article that will be published tomorrow in the New Age, where I said we have to understand what happened in the 1940s when the African National Congress Youth League was formed, where it introduced a whole set of new policies which then led to the protests and mass action of the 1950s. What we need in South Africa is policy-driven politics, not the kind of politics that Pravin Gordhan presents. And those policy-driven politics have to address the issues that the students are concerned about. The issues around education, the issues around the exploitation of the majority of South Africans, and it has to be policies that are driven by radical economic transformation and policies that will take us to what we call the second phase of the National Democratic Revolution. Now, instead, Mr. Gordhan tries to play these kind of personality politics. He tries to play the attacks on his own president and president of his party, the African National Congress. What we have to get down to, and what the students got down to, was what are the political policy issues that you want to address? How are we going to deal with the exploitation of ourselves and our parents? How are we going to deal with the issue around the fees for education and free education for all of us? What are these issues, and how are we going to implement them in a reasonable and rational way and relate them back to the policies that have been promised to us also through the Freedom Charter? None of that was done by Pravin Gordhan. What he did was he was trying to use the students, he was abusing that platform in order to promote his own personal political agenda and the agenda of white monopoly capital.
Well, the message certainly backfired. I mean, to the extent where students were calling him a sellout. Why, if I may just get clarity for those that missed it, would you feel that he's a sellout? Saki, non-tobe.
From my perspective, as I've said, I can say he's a sellout because he came to us and he wasn't coming to us. You get me? He didn't mention anything regarding students. He was there to push his own personal agenda. He was there to achieve something for himself, not for the student or to give something to the student. That's why I can say he was there to push his personal agenda, not to address the student.
But to benefit what? Because he's not there on his own wind. He's there to represent the ANC as an MP deployed by the ANC.
They divided ANC, not the whole ANC.
Which part of the ANC are you talking about? Because it feels like it's not a united ANC, if you ask me personally. It feels like it's not a united ANC at all. Which part of the ANC was he representing? Because it wasn't all of... Because even the students who actually protested yesterday and calling him a sellout, those students are not only in favor of other political parties, but also of the ANC on their own. Do you get it? So...
What's that?
Well, Cindy, you know, having have listened to the students, two things that comes to my conclusion. One, it is very clear that actually the management of UJ, who actually organized this whole fracas, are in question as well. The students are saying they were misled there. They were not even given an agenda prior to the date of the meeting and be properly briefed on what would be happening. So they were ambushed into a meeting thinking that their student affairs and queries are going to be addressed. And they found themselves there talking about the Guptas and white capital and ownership of land that doesn't concern them. That's one element. The second element is it is the very same Pravin. Let me remind the nation that it is the very same Pravin Gordhan, the former Minister of Finance, who President Zuma chose him as well as the Minister of Higher Education, Blade in Zimande, and one other minister to form a committee that was supposed to look into the fees must fall protest, to look into the cost of higher education. To date, after he has even left his position, he never attended one meeting as the Minister of Finance of that subcommittee that the President had put into place to look at affairs of students. I do not know why will a university management think that somebody who has dismally failed to perform a duty that was given to him by his principal for the best interest of the student, he can come now and address those students. And we know what happened in UJ a few years back. We know that there's been casualties, no lives have been lost of black people that Pravin is claiming to be representing, and he's not representing the so-called Guptas and the white monopoly capital. This is the person that is not supposed to be given these platforms, but the African National Congress as well. I'm being questioning it to say, why would they allow somebody in their ticket to go around the country and actually talking completely contrary to the policies of the movement that has given him a platform? He's going around the country on the ticket of the ANC. He's still the chairperson or a member of a certain committee of parliament. He's an MP of the ANC. When he speaks there, even if he doesn't mention the African National Congress, he talks as if he's the Messiah. He talks as if he's the most cleanest person in this country who has governed well, and that is not true.
Yeah.
The ANC always talks about collective governance, and why in this instance, when the youth and students are saying the ANC is divided, he wants to stand up and say, I'm not divided, I'm the clean and the perfect one. That cannot be correct.
Yeah.
Now, what I actually want to ask, and I hope this question will be asked of Mr. Gordhan also in the coming NEC meetings that is coming up, were you talking as an NEC member of the ANC? And if you were doing so, can you please explain to us whether the positions that you were advancing to the students, because remember, he doesn't go there just as an individual. He goes there as a member of the National Executive of the ANC. Were those positions the positions of the ANC? Can you explain to us where those decisions had been taken? And why did you treat the students with this kind of disdain? Because the issues that the students wanted to hear about, we heard tonight. They wanted to hear about the education issues. They wanted to hear about the economy. They wanted to hear about the reality of the South African situation. Instead, he came to tell fibs to them in order to serve his own personal and very factional agenda.
Yeah, Professor Hanyane, I mean, as Mr. Niehaus is saying that the NEC would have to make a decision in how their leaders represent their party and the ideologies. We've seen now with Dr. Makoza being served with disciplinary charges, and yet no action against Pravin. But coming back to the issues that even concession made by a former finance minister saying that a lot of mistakes were made post-1994 that has led to where we are, let alone the open borders in terms of trade that have impacted in the competitiveness of this country, let alone the quality of life of the majority black people. What does that say to you in terms of the level of responsibility that he's taken or omitted to do so?
Well, there are a number of issues that one would have to deal with here. One is the quality of politicking, if I may use that phrase very carefully, in the country. To what extent are we able to tolerate different views? It's another issue. But I think going forward to try and which I think is a big question that you've asked, is within the ANC itself, the culture of tolerance, reflective of the kinds of divisions that quite rightly we cannot deny that they exist. How do you consolidate, how do you manage these divisions, ideologically and otherwise? So your question, Cindy, it's loaded. But to break it down, this would be my simple response. As a polity, have we matured enough to be able to tolerate different views, different opinions? Within the ANC itself, is there a robust culture of dealing with dissent, for instance? And if there is such, is that kind of approach working? And I think the Dr. Khosa case is somewhat of a litmus test to these issues that I've raised here.
Okay, and then guys, going forward, I mean, when you are in your meetings in prescribing, or rather setting the tone of what you would want to be addressed, yes, this event happens, but going forward, are you involved intricately in deciding who comes in and represents or rather speaks to you?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
No, we were not informed. We would love to be informed. We would love to address certain issues. We'd like to know what's going on, not just being ambushed into a meeting that we have no idea what's going on. We just knew that we had to attend this. We didn't even get a chance to even ask questions about what's even going on around us in terms of our fees. There's unemployment going on in the country. We are students. We know what's going on, but please let us know what to be involved in.
Yeah, I want to go back to that point, that Pravin had made regarding the 94 mistakes, in that these are, by and large, the reasons why we are unable to transform the economy. We are not able to include the black majority because of the policies that were taken there. And are you of that view as well, Saki? That because of the issues or concessions we made in 1994, that's why life hasn't really changed much for black people?
I can talk much about that.
Go ahead. Oh, you weren't there in 1994. Yeah. But your parents would have told you how the struggles of having to,
I don't want to mention such things because I wasn't there, and I would be lying because those are my parents' experience, not mine.
Okay. And they don't impact on you?
They do impact on me, but to mention them in my statements and believe them, you'll be like, I'm lying or I'm just trying to take my parents' side. I don't know whether my parents are right or wrong.
Okay, so you're taking your challenges as they come. Yeah. But if you've just joined us, good evening. This is ANN7 Prime with me, Cindy Mabi. You're discussing the lecture held yesterday at the University of Johannesburg. Now, Pravin Gordhan, and he is then Deputy Mcebisi Jonas, grandstanding at UJ, has drawn criticism from its own party colleagues, commenting on the fiasco that UJ lecture turned out to be. Several ANC leaders took to social media questioning the conduct of the two, and the statement made by the two drew criticism for their lack of understanding of reality. Now, taking to Twitter, Ekurhuleni Executive Mayor Mzwandile Masina says, and I quote, "Defenders of white monopoly capital embarrassed at UJ. There was more political depth from students than Pravin and Jonas combined. What a shame," end quote. And then Police Minister Fikile Mbalula tweeted, and I quote, "Shout out to students there at UJ. This afternoon they showed the nation they have clarity, my kind of people," end quote. And then continue with the discussion there. Yeah, you guys feel that, that reflects on what you were feeling at the lecture?
Yes, it did, actually did.
Yeah. So your political depth that is lacking from the panelists, what is your understanding that they have missed in terms of what is going on? Where do you feel that they do not understand, or they pretend they have selective amnesia of where the political stance of the country is at the moment?
We know what's going on.
Okay, what's going on? So we're all clear what exactly is going on.
No, like, we know what's going on. We watch the news. We know, as much as we're not so involved in it, but we do watch the news. We know what's going on, and we do not want to be, how can I put this? We do not want to be forced into things that we really, right now, as students, are not part of. We are at school, we're getting an education, hoping to get better jobs in the future. But now when this comes along, what are we supposed to actually...
Let's get a view from an elder.
What are we supposed to actually...
Cindy, as they are talking, it's beautiful to listen to students, and I engage with them a lot. And I'm quoting people today. It was Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, the founder of the PAC, who said, no matter how intelligent, educated, or illiterate African people are, never ever underestimate their intelligence. And these students yesterday, they demonstrated to Pravin Gordhan and his former deputy. I don't know why they're still deputizing each other, even in wrong platforms. They demonstrated that they cannot be underestimated, their intelligence. They are saying, we know what is going on. We know what had happened. We listen to the news. We don't want to get involved in those issues, even if they're impacting us, while our primary issues are not being taken into consideration. That's what the students are saying.
Yeah, and I mean, with the colleagues, as we mentioned, Fikile Mbalula and Mzwandile Masina, criticizing Pravin Gordhan, for lacking political depth, being exposed by the students, it then brings the question, in what capacity were they speaking to the students, and who had endorsed this message if it wasn't, from a personal vantage point?
The case, Cindy, and this twiddle-dee, twiddle-dum performance that we saw yesterday was in fact one where they were not speaking in a capacity, as I say, clearly as members of the National Executive of the African National Congress. If they were, the policies and the positions that they were advancing would have been different. So we are dealing here with people who don't see themselves in the first instance as representing the ANC as the leader of society, but they see themselves in the first instance as people who must act as apologists for white monopoly capital. Good heavens, why must we continue to debate this issue around monopoly capital and what is its color? The color of monopoly capital in South Africa is white. Every black person in this country understands it. Every black person in this country feels it on their skin. And yet, two black people, one African, one Indian, goes to the University of Johannesburg and tries to sell this colorless, strange monopoly capital because, and this is the reason, because they themselves have been captive by white monopoly capital. So the students were right when they asked them the question. And the answer, I'm afraid, had been given to us through their actions. Are you sellouts? That is the question that was asked. And the behavior confirmed the question.
I would also like to differ a little bit with the Mzwandile and the two other ministers to say Pravin lacks depth. He doesn't lack depth. He has been in the SACP and the ANC for a very long time. He is being driven by those who control him at the moment. He is being driven by greed of wanting to remain in this wealth that is in the hands of white people, and they've co-opted a few black faces like him to can be managers of this white wealth and be a shield in protecting this. You cannot come today and tell me that Pravin does not have politics or does not understand the ANC and the SACP. He does. He chose or he elected not to push the policy position of the parties he belonged to, but to protect the white interests of this country. For what? I can only come to one conclusion. It is not for the love that Pravin had for white people. It's for the love that he has for money that white people are dispensing to him. And that can be the only reason.
All right, so organizations, he mentioned the churches, you have other so-called civic organizations and Save SA in particular. What do you guys understand of the intention or the mandate of those kind of organizations that will march and say Save SA, Zuma must fall? What is your understanding of what's going on with those kind of campaigns? Ntobeko. You guys are such good students. If they put their hand up, it's like, no, man, I must call you out first. You're not like me when I was at school. It's like, pick me, pick me. Yeah, carry on.
I really can't speak much about that personally because when these marches go on, I feel like it's as much as it's a political agenda, but I feel like we're not facing the real issue as a whole. because now it's taken to students. And my question is, what was he hoping to achieve with all of this? Are we blind? Are we stupid? What was he hoping to achieve with all of this?
You see, Cindy, the sad thing, and I absolutely sympathize with you, the sad thing is that our students are being dropped by the behavior of some of their seniors and adults.
In power, exactly.
We drop them because we get involved in debates that have got nothing to do with their experience and their lives. We then have the management of the University of Johannesburg putting a meeting together clearly with an agenda, with intentions. They don't consult with the students. They use the students simply as a hook to hang this agenda on. And the agenda is to try and promote Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas, as I said, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, behaving in the way they were behaving there. And when the students point it out, in anger and in frustration that they do not want to be used and abused in this manner, what does Pravin do? He says, "You are not moral. I question your ethics." Really? Who are the people who are immoral? Who are the people whose ethics should be questioned when they behave in this manner and maltreat and mistreat young people of South Africa for their own personal political agendas?
All right, before... sorry, Nandobek, carry on.
If anything at all, we're actually looking up to them. And so if such behavior is being done, what is being said to us? Is that how we're supposed to do things from here on?
All right, let's get a perspective from our group political editor, Sfiso Matlangu. We have Thabo Mutle, ANC Youth League NEC member, Tabang Mohlomuza, Gauteng COSA's provincial chairperson, and Oliver Dixon, a social political analyst. We'll start with you, Mr. Group political editor, Sfiso Matlangu, and just hearing the voice of the students to say they're disappointed, they feel disregarded and mistreated in the way these, who are supposed to be leaders at least, engage with them.
Good evening to you, Ms. Cindy Mabe. Not so long ago, I used to be sitting on the panel over there with you. God is good.
All the time.
I think the reality of what is happening in this political diaphragm is that political leaders will go anywhere and try and attract anyone by any hook or trick for votership. Everyone knows in this country that if anyone can get the land back, it is the students. And if you target the students and you remember what happened in 1976, it was the students in this country that collapsed apartheid. It was the students that took up stones and matches and fought the apartheid regime. Now, the reality of politics is if you can unite students behind you in a move of solidarity with whatever political mandate or mantle you're trying to propagate in society, you have a winning formula. And it was in this spirit that Mr. Mcebisi Jonas and Mr. Pravin Gordhan went to the University of Johannesburg yesterday. It had nothing to do with the students per se. I believe it was a desire to inform students about the state capture, what they considered the state of capture, the Gupta family and President Jacob Zuma. And it was try and unify a garnering attack for himself and Mr. Jonas and their slate coming to December 2017. But the questions Mr. Pravin Gordhan did not answer is when actually the state was captured. The questions he could not answer were the attacks on various families in this country, when the land will return. He couldn't answer on the facts and the realities of a few families that have captured state-owned enterprises like Eskom for 30 and 40 years. He couldn't answer on insurance groups and businesses that are still owned by white monopoly capital. They couldn't attest or speak anything of the fact that only 3% of the JSE is black-owned. 97% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is still white-owned, owned by white monopoly capital. So someone can take a podium at a university and lambast people for capturing the state and forget to mention the people who, in fact, up to this day, have actually captured the state. So it was, I believe, disingenuous for Mr. Pravin Gordhan to do that. But I'm glad that the students saw right through this move and questioned his ethics. They questioned his morality. They questioned his need and desire to speak. And of course, the MC tried to stop this event, but I think the students had the last word. As Plato spoke, I think, Cindy, it's true. You can lie to some of the people some of the time, but you cannot lie to all the people all the time.
All right, let's get Mr. Dixon's view, and now especially with the criticism from his colleagues, or their colleagues rather. Is this a good indication that the NEC maybe needs to censor the two before they create any further confusion?
Unlike Siso here, I actually do miss sitting next to you over there. But I think we need to zoom out of this conversation and have a look at the bigger picture. Because the reality here is that the inefficiencies in the economy that we're speaking about are not as a result of Pravin Gordhan. Neither is it as a result of Mcebisi Jonas. More dangerously, when our current finance minister took office after the reshuffle, he said, I will continue with all the policies just as is and I will change nothing. That's to say, if we're going to say that Pravin Gordhan failed to reform the economy, failed to talk about land, and failed to do any of the things we desire from the economy, we have to then also assume that Malusi Gigaba will continue those inefficiencies. And that's a more important conversation, not what happened a year ago in the economy, but what's going to happen in a year from now in the economy. And I think that's where the conversation needs to be directed towards. Because the reality here is that Trevor Manuel failed the economy. Nhlanhla Nene failed the economy. Mcebisi Jonas failed the economy, as well as Pravin Gordhan. So this is not a problem that we should solely place on one person. It could have been any politician speaking at that event, and the message would have been the same, and the reaction from the students would have been exactly the same. Because the reality is there's no political will from the elders of this country to effectively change the economy. I mean, the ANC has been in power for this long, and the closest we've gotten to economic reformation is BEE. But even that sometimes has inefficiencies, because the reality of white capital is true. The fact that SAA had a procurement budget of 39 billion rand, and more than 90% of that budget was spent on white-owned businesses. Only 80 million of 39 billion rand was spent on black-owned businesses. That's less than 5% of that procurement budget. So that's an example of the reality of state capture.
Facing. But Sangwila has a response to that.
I wanted to respond to Mr. Dixon. I appreciate his facts, but he is wrong where he's saying any other politician would have been on that platform, you have been booed by the students. That's not correct. It is what Pravin was saying to the students and his conduct towards the student that led the student to rebel and revolt against him. If any minister or politician would have gone to the UJ platform and said to those students, I'm here to come and talk to you about lack of funding, how NEFSAS is failing and so forth, those students would have not questioned what they questioned yesterday. They would have focused on issues of education.
All right, Mr. Motlamozi,
I think the students would have treated someone who treated them with respect properly. But let me come to your question. Should the National Executive of the ANC censor Mr. Gordhan and Mr. Jonas? I think it should be seriously considered. And I think the ANC's NEC will have to ask Mr. Gordhan not just about his behavior yesterday at UJ, but in terms of his behavior over the last number of months, including the statements that he have recently made, which are very similar to the ones that Dr. Koza made when she said that President Zuma should step down. In fact, Pravin Gordhan had done the same. Now let us deal with him then in exactly the same manner that we are dealing with Dr. Koza. Let's bring disciplinary action and deal with these people who do not behave in line with the ANC's policies and who do not seem to understand what central democracy in any organization such as the ANC should mean. If they do not want to respect the ANC, if they do not want to respect the democratically elected president of the ANC, let them face the music.
Yeah, all right. Tabang Motlamozi, Gauteng COSA's provincial chairperson, good evening to you. The concession that was made by PG saying that mistakes were made in 1994, but he's not the only one that should be held accountable. In taking the radical economic transformation agenda forward with the baggage that we have in the constitution confining, or rather being a hurdle to radicalism, how then can these students enjoy a future that is less hardened as what their parents experienced?
Good evening and thanks for hosting us on your show. Firstly, let us salute the might of the students that reacted yesterday against a person who wants to portray himself as a spokesperson of the enemy. Pravin Gordhan has no right to say to us that he is not the only one who should be accountable for what's happening in South Africa, because he is the most one who has benefited from the CODESA talks that negotiated South Africa into what it is today. We cannot continue blaming the ANC that under 23 years of democracy was still having an economy that is centered in the hands of white people, whereas we know that it is our own people, it is our own comrades such as Pravin Gordhan who are still holding the economy back in the hands of white people who do not want to see South Africa going forward. And we are saying that as the students, we have identified our mission and we choose not to betray it. We have seen that there is an enemy in South Africa. That enemy arrived in 1652. That enemy is imperialism. That enemy today is called white capital monopoly. And we are saying that as COSAS, we are going to fight it. We are going to root it out, each and every individual. We are going to take it head to head. We are saying that engaging about radical economic transformation is not going to assist at this point. We must go to the ground. We must radically transform the education system. We're speaking of banks. We're speaking about the lands. Who owns all of these companies that are listed in the JSE? They are all centered in the hands of the white people. Who owns all of these banks in South Africa? They are centered in the hands of white people. Who owns means of production in South Africa? It's white people. Therefore, we're saying that as the Congress of South African Students, we need to confront the enemy because we have stopped confronting the enemy after we've received our freedom. We thought that we have arrived the stage. South Africa has arrived where it should be. And this is a message that we've portrayed to our people. That's why people have been relaxed. But we're saying that as the young people of this generation are going to unite and ensure that we root out each and every person. These people must live and take the biggest ship to where they come from when they arrived there in 1652. We're saying that we're going to...
but we're bordering on unconstitutionality now. But let's just bring it back in what happened yesterday. Would you say that it was a rejection of the state capture rhetoric from the students, or more a message that wasn't well received, or because the audience was not receptive?
I agree with that, Cindy. I think the mistake made by the former minister was not firstly just hitting slurs. His conduct and his discipline towards the students was very disintegrating and very condescending. I think he had to look at them as young academics, people who are the future of this country. And I think listening to these students yesterday and today, I've heard things that really make me proud to be living in this country, and that the future of the black child may be safe. And one day, a radical economic transformation will come to this nation. But I think Mr. Pravin Gordhan made the mistake when he entered that platform and started hitting slurs and thought maybe the students did not understand what he was saying. If he wanted to address students on change, he needed to address issues of land, issues of fees must fall, and not talk about an economy that he failed to transform. So it is like being in a marriage when you say, well, we're all happy and dovey, and then one exits you from that union. And then you go to any pillar and post to try and stay in that union. As soon as you're ejected and rejected from that union or marriage, then you slander them and say how wrong they are. I think that was the mistake. So this talk was not centered around development. It did not have the student in mind. The object of yesterday's talk was to bring down President Jacob Zuma and what Mr. Pravin Gordhan considers the Zuma camp or the Zuma factions. And I think the students got a wind of that, and then they attacked him personally. I don't think any student in this country or any person in this country has a challenge with development. But I think what students have a challenge with is that a person assumes to be sanctimonious and self-righteous at the cost of other leaders, at the cost of other students, and tries to de-exemplarize their unity and intelligence. I think that was the problem.
Mr. Mahlangu, we're going to leave it there. Group Political Editor Fiso Mahlangu, Thabo Mutle, ANC Youth League NEC member, Tabang Mhlomuza, Gauteng COSAS Provincial Chairperson, Oliver Dixon is a social political analyst, Carl Niehaus is a NEC member of MKMVA. We have Butsang Mwelwa, a political analyst, and a Young Lions joining us in studio, Onontobego and Saki. We wish you all the best and hope to see you again on our platform. And thanks to you at home for watching. We're back after this.